Ladies and gentlemen, it is 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. My name is Chris, and this is my channel, Bar None 11970. Thank you, as always, for taking the time to listen to what I have to say, and we're going to hopefully do some learning today. Now, basically what I want to teach people about the petrodollar, because this is important to everyone around the world. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give just a basic introduction for people who may not be familiar with this. So consider this petrodollar 101. So this is going to really be beneficial to help awaken people that may not be aware of this stuff, because the mainstream media isn't going to talk about this. You ask the average person on the street of what the petrodollar is, they're going to have no clue what you're talking about. And there's a reason for that. So this is going to be an entry level. I'm going to skip a lot of the major points. I want you to get the general idea, because the one thing I've learned with my 5+ years of experience doing this is I find that if something is thrown at you right off the bat where it's so complicated and you don't understand it, you'll tend to be turned off by it and you won't pay attention and you won't learn. So a lot of people tell me that I'm very good at teaching the basics so they can get the general understanding. Because if you had your first day of kindergarten and some teacher tries to teach you, physics, you're going to have no idea what they're talking about and you're not going to want to learn. So keep that in mind, especially if you know this stuff already. Again, the average person out there has no idea what the petrodollar is. So to first give a little background, what I want people to know is, because I see this all the time, because I live in the United States of America Corporation, and I see a lot of people all around the world that leave comments and say, oh, I hope, the United States gets what it deserves. I hope, they do crash and we're all going to sit there and laugh. The problem that we have to understand is this is a global issue. What happens to one is going to affect all the others. So the whole divide and conquer not only works for male, female, black, white, gay, straight, different religions and everything. It also goes by borders and different countries. And the fact that we've been trained all our lives to hate one another just because we just grew up in a different area of this earth and to speak different languages. I mean, we have to get past that stuff. But I want people to understand that this is a global situation, the petrodollar, and the lie that is going on with all governments for all the people. So keep that in mind. So we're going to, keep this very basic. But it all starts out, basically, when it affects the world. It starts out, the reason it affects the world is, in 1971, Richard Nixon convinced the entire world to go off the gold standard. Basically, before that, what was happening is any country around the world could exchange their currency for gold, which we were holding in our reserves due to the fact of World War II. So many people were putting gold into our country, to pay for the war, because wars are profitable for some people. Not for all of us, but the people in quote-unquote charge. So when we got to the point where we realized that we're getting rid of all of our gold, and they had to put a stop to it, they basically convinced the entire world. Now, this is every country on the planet. They all agreed at the same time that their currencies would no longer be backed by gold, and it became what is known as a fiat currency. I highly recommend you get into looking up things like fiat. It's F-I-A-T. Again, I'm going to keep this, very basic. I'm not going to go into the major stuff. Okay? So every country around the world basically sold out their people, because now all the dollars were based on no value. They were not based on anything other than debt, and you have to borrow it into existence in order to create it. So whether you live in England or Italy or China or Russia, it doesn't matter. They all agreed to this. So that's the basics. And then what happened is, in the 70s, we made an agreement with the oil manufacturers in the Middle East. And in a nutshell, what the agreement basically boiled down to is, we would help them refine their oil and help distribute it throughout the world. And in return, they were to convert any currency that wanted to buy oil from any country into the US dollar. In other words, what happened was, if somebody wanted to buy oil from, example, a country like Saudi Arabia, they would have to first convert their currency into the US dollar in order to buy it. So all around the world, to buy oil for your country, they had to convert their money into the US dollar, which obviously, if you live in the United States, that's going to be very beneficial to our country, because one of the biggest things is we can export our inflation. So every time you feel like, oh, there's going to be this massive inflation, well, because of the fact that all countries around the world have to buy oil and convert their dollars, their currency into US dollars, it helps our country and it hurts everybody else's. What it also does is it puts the oil manufacturing countries, basically they lose a lot of their freedom, because their currency is now, they're using the dollar. And if they basically keep it liquid, in other words, they keep it paper dollars, as you can see, as we print more and more of these fiat currencies, these dollars, because they're debt notes, they lose their purchasing power. They lose their value. It's the whole thing of supply and demand. So just imagine if, for example, you're a country, Saudi Arabia, who was once an independent nation, and then all of a sudden the United States of America Corporation comes along and says, you know, we'll help you with your manufacturing of your oil. We want you to convert everything into US dollars. So Saudi Arabia would be getting paid in US dollars. Well, since they do not regulate the US dollars, they lose a lot of their freedom and control, because if we manipulate the dollars, they lose their purchasing power. So we had a lot of influence over the Middle East throughout the 70s, 80s, 90s, and today. And that's why we can basically create sanctions, and it could affect a lot of countries, because if we lower the interest rate or we increase the amount of currency out there, it devalues it, they lose their purchasing power. Okay, so that's the general idea of the petrodollar, that it is a world currency. It's not like there's a US dollar that we use here, and then all of a sudden there's another kind of bill called the petrodollar. They just nicknamed it because the dollar was pegged to petro, which of course is oil. So basically what has been happening in the past few years is we've seen other countries wanting to get out of the petrodollar. Now, if you lived in another country, you could see how this would be beneficial for your country to be out of it. Now, let's just say, for example, you are the leader of a country. Let's say you call yourselves Pennsylvania, okay? You own your country, it's called Pennsylvania. You're supposed to be an independent nation. And then, come 1971, Richard Nixon takes the world off the gold standard, and for whatever reason, whether you were forced into it, bribed into it, whatever, you decide to take whatever currency you had in your country of Pennsylvania and convert the oil industry that you have to purchase from into US dollars. You have to convert your money into someone else's currency. That gives the control of your country and the sovereignty of your country into another nation to be able to manipulate it and regulate it. Now, if you were the president or king of Pennsylvania, and you realize that every time you buy oil and you have to convert your currency to the US dollar, that it ends up being more beneficial to the United States corporation than it is to your own country, and your people suffer because your currency, which maybe 100 years ago was backed by gold, which gave it real strength, no longer is backed by anything other than the dollar, which is manipulated and owned by and regulated by someone else. So it would be a very smart move on your behalf to try and get away from that system. I mean, logically, if you owned your own country, you would want to have your own monetary system, wouldn't you? There are people that have tried to do this. One was in Libya with Gaddafi, and the other was Iraq with Saddam Hussein. Now, you've been taught that these people were terrorists. And in a way, from the eyes of the beholder of who said it, that is true, although not in the way you think about it. And I'll give you a prime example. let's just assume the Nazis were bad people. And I'm not going to go into how many different versions of what people say about the Nazis and whether they were not as what they seem or anything. We're not going to get into that here. Let's just assume the storybooks are true and the Nazis were evil people and you were part of the Nazi regime. And you realized at some point, hey, wait a minute. The Nazis are not doing the good things that I thought they were. They are actually pretty evil, and I no longer want to be a Nazi. Well, wouldn't you be considered a traitor by the people that you once worked with? And if you all of a sudden joined the other side, the Allies, and started bombing some of the Nazi cities, wouldn't you be considered a terrorist, according to the Nazi regime? So we have to be very careful about words, because it's not the word that's said, but who's saying it. So yes, according to the United States corporation movement and their lie, they said that people like Gaddafi and Hussein were terrorists. All they wanted to do was no longer use the US dollar to get oil. They wanted to have their own monetary system to give their country the freedom and the independence they have the right to have. But if other countries started getting away from the US dollar, it would lose its world domination. And that could topple the system. Which, if you are in control of the US dollar, like the Federal Reserve is, that would not be a good thing. So they start wars and blame people for things like, for example, blaming Hussein for having weapons of mass destruction, which they never did find, but at that point it was too late. We had already entered their country and shot them and killed them and took over a lot of their areas, that it didn't matter after the fact. So what's happening with the petrodollar? It's like a form of gang, where they say either you take our currency or we will murder the people who do not agree. And the problem with that is, all around the world, the people are suffering because when they want to buy oil, they have to convert their currency to the US dollar. They have no control over how many dollars get printed, or whether it's devalued or not. So it affects the people in all the other countries. Now, why is that relevant to today? Well, you notice we have a lot of propaganda going on towards Russia, correct? They're trying to say that Russia's responsible for the WikiLeaks, that Russia's responsible for messing up our democratic system, even though we know it's no longer a democracy anymore. I mean, if you think this is a democracy, you're kidding yourself. This is a socialist, fascist regime at this point. When you have the merger of corporate and state, that is not capitalism. Capitalism is when you take the risk of building up your business. If it succeeds, that's great. If it fails, it's too bad, so sad. But when you get government bailouts that only go towards the big corporations, that is not capitalism. That is not democracy. Because if it was democracy, we would be voting on it. And do you think the masses of people would want to give bailouts to just the big corporations so they could fleece us and steal from us? Wouldn't we want to have the mom and pop stores and the local businesses get bailouts too, if that was the case, if we had the voting ability? Isn't that what democracy is supposed to be about? But we don't have that. We also have healthcare that is regulated by the government. We also have the schools, the colleges, with guaranteed loans paid for by who? The government. That's why college prices are so high. So we're not going to get off track. So you see all this propaganda going on with Russia right now. And you see they're trying to increase all these tensions. And of course, since basically you have 6 major corporations that own over 90% of the media that you see, read, and hear, they are going to give you all this misinformation because they know 99% of the people will just believe what they're told and never verify it. So what does that have to do with Russia? Well, what Russia and China have been doing, and several other countries have been doing, is they're starting to get away from the petrodollar. In other words, they are exchanging their own currencies for oil, bypassing the US dollar. what that eventually will do is crumble the US dollar. Now, that is one of the major reasons why I've been saving and storing and stacking up with physical gold and silver, because that is a world currency. Gold and silver can be exchanged all over the world. Go to France with a peso, go to a store and try and buy something, or go to a bank and try and exchange it. It's not that easy. But if you have gold or silver, it's taken everywhere. So that's one way to majorly protect yourself. So we are, instead of saying the truth of what's going on, we want to be the big guys, the big boss, the world controllers, and we're now blaming Russia for all these things to get people to look in another direction and not realize what it is. That Russia or any other country should have the right to have its own currency for its own people. And who is any country, who is it their right to dictate what other countries can do? And yet we do it through force and through the fact that since we have the entire world on the petrodollar, we have a lot of control over what's at stake with each country. And of course, the leaders of each country, I'm sure, were fully aware of these things, but they got paid off, or they were murdered and replaced with somebody who will be paid off. So wherever you live while you're listening to this, your leaders have sold you out. So that's why leaders throughout the world are always very wealthy. And you even look in this country how we betrayed our own people. John F. Kennedy wanted to create Executive Order 11110. And if you don't know what that is, look it up. That is an actual government document that John F. Kennedy wanted to sign into law. Now, what was that? In a nutshell, we borrow our money from the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is not part of the United States. It's basically a private-owned bank that's owned by shareholders. Shareholders like the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, and other corporations that own banks, like the Morgans, for example. So we are borrowing money, quote-unquote money, from the Federal Reserve. Now, the Federal Reserve doesn't manufacture anything. They don't sell anything. They don't create anything. And yet they have unlimited funds that we can borrow at any given moment to the point of the billions and trillions, which is good for them because the government can borrow all this paper, put it into existence. Basically, a lot of it now is just digital numbers, which we all borrow, which creates more of this quote-unquote money. And they only create the principal amount, which does not include the interest. So if there was $1 million, let's say there's $1 trillion in existence. Well, when you borrow money, you owe interest. So let's say with interest, it's $1.4 trillion. Well, that $0.4 trillion doesn't exist. They only create the amount of $1 trillion. They do not ever create the interest. That is the scam. So you have to borrow more to pay off that amount of the interest, which again creates more interest. So all governments, especially in this country, they borrow money from a private bank, basically in a nutshell. They lend it to the people, which we have to use our labor to pay back plus interest. So it continually spirals. And because the US dollar is the world currency as far as oil is concerned, they can manipulate it by any time. If another country gets out of line, all they have to do is devalue the dollar and it affects other countries. Or they can make the dollar stronger and it affects other countries. So in other words, other countries around the world are basically staying afloat or sinking based on what we do to the dollar. Now, what Executive Order 11110, it's 4 1s and an O, wanted to do was John F. Kennedy wanted to create what's called the greenback. He wanted to have our own U.S. Treasury, our own government, make our money. Doesn't that make sense? Well, just like what happened with Libya, with Gaddafi, and what happened with Hussein in Iraq, they executed John F. Kennedy in the same way, although they just didn't call him a terrorist. So if you think about it, it even happened with our own government. John F. Kennedy wanted to, instead of borrowing money from a private bank called the Federal Reserve, which created billions of dollars of interest that would keep the U.S. citizens and its people in debt forever, he wanted us to make our own monetary system, which would make sense, wouldn't it? Because if you look at a U.S. penny, nickel, dime, or quarter, it says U.S. Mint. If you look at a 1, 5, 10, 20, 50, 100, 1,000, etc. paper note, nowhere on it will it say U.S. Treasury. It says Federal Reserve Note. It is not money. It looks like money. It has purchasing power like money, but it is not money. It is debt. And every time you borrow money from a bank, every time you use your credit cards, which I've told people get out of, you are creating more ability for the Federal Reserve to create more invisible made money, which creates more interest, which they steal from us in the phrase and term called taxes. And John F. Kennedy wanted to stop that. And he was assassinated for it. That was not the only reason why he was assassinated, but it was one of the major ones. So just think, if you were the President of the United States, and you realized that we don't even make our own money. We make quarters, we make nickels, we make dimes, we make pennies. Good luck using those to buy a house or a business. But we don't make the paper. We did before 1913, before the Federal Reserve opened. But now we don't. And it's destroying the middle class, and it's making the poor forever stay poor. And if you were the president and you said, wait a minute, instead of borrowing money from a private bank where we have to pay back interest, which causes the taxpayers trillions of dollars, maybe billions, why don't we just make our own money? Wouldn't that make sense? Well, when you're part of the cartel and part of the crime syndicate, you murder people like that. And that is why there has been no real president since John F. Kennedy. And that is why most of his family was assassinated, including his son. And if you ever realize the name of his John F. Kennedy Jr.'s magazine was George, then you probably have an idea of who was responsible for maybe not pulling the trigger, but setting up the assassination. And there, if you know anything about presidents, there was a specific president called George in the 80s who had a son that was also president. Now, obviously, I can't prove that this is a true statement, but it's something to look into. So when it comes to this petrodollar, no currency is going to last forever when it is corrupt and is dishonest. As a matter of fact, if you look throughout history, when monetary systems become so diluted because of greed, they have a 100% failure rate. And that is what's starting to happen now. So all of those trolls and haters who have been attacking me over the years because I didn't get every single thing right, because it is a learning process, hate anybody that buys physical gold and silver, because it will protect you around the world. It's just not going to protect you yet. But once the petrodollar finally collapses, it will affect the world, not just the United States. Now, we might be hit the hardest, or we might be hit the soonest, but think of a set of dominoes. If you have a set of dominoes lined up, one has to fall first, but the others follow suit. So just to give you an example of why the media is so hard now trying to push problems with Russia, is because they want to use misdirection and not make people research what's going on. Because then if you did, you probably wouldn't like what they're doing. So they're going to eventually, because I keep telling people, when people do nothing, you create the inevitable. The inevitable is they want to have some sort of war. That could be just a regular skirmish that we've seen throughout the decades, or it could go full-fledged nuclear. I don't think it's going to get nuclear, because in an infinite universe, you have all the possibility to change anything in the world. If you do nothing, you allow things to happen. So to the to the bare minimum, we're going to have some kind of war happen. To the extreme, it could be a nuclear war. I doubt it's going to be that, and I don't promote fear. But these are possibilities. That depends on the people. If the people want to care more about what's being done in Hollywood, and they want to keep trolling each other and hating on each other and do nothing and think, oh, this is crazy, or it's only going to affect a certain amount of people, and if you want to do nothing, nothing is going to change, and you are set on the path, and it's going to be inevitable. But you can change it. Because as of now, it hasn't happened yet. But just to give you an example of why they are pushing on Russia so hard, is because one of the largest natural gas producers on the planet is called Gazprom. That's G-A-Z as in zebra, prom, Gazprom. They've signed agreements with some of the biggest customers around the world to switch from dollars to euros. And that is mainly due thanks to the approval of the Russian government. So there are countries around the world that are saying, we no longer want to be dependent on the US dollar. They're different countries. They're supposed to be sovereign countries. Don't they have the right to choose whatever they want for their own people? So, to give a perspective, Gazprom makes about 8% of the total Russian GDP and holds 18% of natural gas reserves. And they're a very large oil producer. And they are working with countries like India and China and other countries that no longer want to go through the US dollar to make purchases for their own currency, for their own country. That will eventually collapse the US dollar's world status. Now, that doesn't mean if it collapses around the world that it's going to be completely worthless. That was the mistake I made years ago when I didn't know as much as I know now. But, for example, in the long term, in this United States of America corporation, it will bring more businesses back here to this country because imports will go through the roof. So you may still have purchasing power here in the United States with your dollars, but anything imported will skyrocket. So places like Walmart will no longer exist in the way that you think about it. So this is stuff that has been around for a while, and still the average person doesn't know about it. Why? Because most people are intimidated by information if there's too much of it. And that's why this video, think of it as PetroDollar 101 or Petrodollars for Dummies. So the average person out there, or the regular person, or the person that really just wants to say, why are things happening the way they're happening, can learn and not make it complicated. So what I'm doing is I'm setting the groundwork for you to do research. If you want to dig into this more, you'll get the bigger details. I don't want to get into the bigger details because too much information right away people are not going to pay attention to. They're going to get intimidated if they don't understand something, and then they will forget or they'll give up on it. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is your duty to spread this truth. Whether it's my video or someone else's, it is your duty to ask people, don't force them, ask them to watch videos like this, and spread this information by posting it on social networks. Because, like I said, if you have a train going down a track, you know that it's going to go from one stop to the next. That's its destiny. But if you stop that train somehow, you can control its destiny or change it. So it's like anything in the world. They want to convince you that this is the inevitable. War is inevitable. And if you believe that to be true, you'll do nothing, which makes that true. We are not at war with Russia yet, but that's what they're gearing up towards, and they're going to blame it on everything else other than the truth. The truth is, countries like China, India, Russia, and I'm sure many other countries around the world are pretty much tired of having their currency being manipulated by some other foreign country's monetary system, and that's the United States, which is basically not the United States, it's the Federal Reserve. Can anyone explain to me any wealthy country in this world? You see nothing but countries in debt, in poverty. So who's succeeding then? Is there one country in the world that's sitting there, you know, have nothing but trillions of their currency and can have whatever they want? It's the people that own the Federal Reserve. And we keep bailing them out. And somehow, we don't have a problem with it. Because some people will be paid lots of money to look the other way. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if that money loses its value, then what do you have? What did you sell out for? So one of the solutions is to spread the information. Spread the truth like a virus. If people nonstop spread this stuff, think about like cancer. If cancer is left untreated, what will it do? It will spread to the point it overtakes all of your regular blood cells and your helper T cells and your white blood cells. It overtakes your body and kills you. But of course, if you get yourself fixed and you stop it, or at least do your best to stop it, you can control it. So think of this world like a cancer. If you do nothing, you know what's going to happen. But if you try your best to stop it, well, you may not guarantee yourself to stop it, but you have a much better chance. It's like winning the lottery. You can't win it if you don't play. If you play, you might have a slim chance, but I'll take a slim chance over no chance. So my thing is, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to stop what the agenda they are pushing, which is an eventual war with countries like Russia, to the point where it could be a regular foot war, or it could be a nuclear war, and again, I don't think it's going to get to that point, but I have no control over that, is to stop it from happening. And that's to no longer accept the lie, no longer participate in the lie. If you have a credit card and you are spending it needlessly on stuff you don't need, congratulations, you are helping to contribute to the problem. If you have a bank account, whether it's justified or not, you are helping to contribute to the problem. Us staying silent and allowing the media and governments to continually lie to us, we are responsible. And that is why I made that video, and I live to this day of trying to be as independent as possible. Until we understand that the solution is to no longer participate, we're helping them. Whether we're doing it indirectly or directly, we're helping them. So I'm not going to make this video any longer. I want to thank everybody that took the time to comment. I want to thank everybody that listened. If you want to hit subscribe, please watch other videos. I've gotten like 2,000 subscribers in the past month. And 90% of them watch one video and that's it. If you're going to subscribe by watching other videos. Learn as much as you can, because knowledge is power. Ignorance is not bliss. Well, it depends on who it's blissful for. Ignorance is very blissful to the people who control you. They love stupid people. They love ignorant people, whether it's willful or not. They love naive and overly trusting people. They want you to believe in their lies, because then they can control you. And the more you are dependent on others to take care of you, the less likely you will be okay in the long run. So if you want to laugh at things like this because it hasn't happened yet, all you have to look is throughout the world. Look at something like Pompeii, and I've used this example before. What is Pompeii? Pompeii is an area of land near Italy where people were living under an active volcano which did not erupt for centuries. So people live there. And they live there because their fathers lived there, their grandfathers lived there, their great-great-great-grandfathers lived there. And no one ever experienced an eruption. Until one day, they died in their sleep. So, I'm not worried about what hasn't happened yet. I'm not worried about what's going to happen. But I'm prepared for it just in case. Because if, let's say, Pompeii was the wealthiest place on the planet at that time, and only the best of the best were lucky enough to be there, and you left 5 years too early, and all the people are like, why are you leaving this beautiful land? Do you realize what you're giving up? Boy, are you stupid? Boy, are you crazy? And every day they call you up and say, or they write you and say, look, you left. Nothing's happened. And then one day you never hear from them again because they all died where they stood. So all these ignorant people, willful ignorant people that laugh about gold and silver because right now the price has dropped a little bit, or right now the price hasn't shot to the moon, and right now it hasn't happened, the collapse hasn't happened yet. Will that matter if it happens tomorrow, or a week from now, or 5 years from now? And that is why I always say, better to be 5 years too early than 5 seconds too late. Because once Pompeii erupts, there's nothing you can do. So that person that left 5 years too early is still living to tell the tale. Who has the last laugh? We seem to worry so much about these trolls and haters and other people, and that's why I bring them up all the time, to take away their power. I'm not afraid to stand up to bullies. Me, when they say stupid things, I just block them. You notice how, I don't know how many other people comment on any other channels, but you notice mine is one of the easiest ones to have conversations with if you can talk civilly and respectfully to one another. There's a reason why, because I have control of it, because I don't just say, oh, ignore them. No, we got to face everything. That's how you learn. That's how you grow. That's how you become strong. Look at kids today. They want to teach kids that every child is a winner no matter what place they come in into a race. What does that teach a child? That you don't have to put in effort? Think about it, ladies and gentlemen. We're coddling people too much instead of realizing that you know what? I never minded being in a race and losing, because then if I wanted to win, I had to work hard to make it happen, because it wasn't just easy. If I was in last place and I got a trophy, I'd be like, what the hell is this? Like dodgeball. I used to love dodgeball, and I didn't win. But I wasn't the first one out, and every time I wanted to get better. It's a way to motivate yourself. People see negativity, and they don't see the benefits and the beautiful things can come out of fearful situations. You learn. Sometimes you work the best when there is nothing but fear and pain and things making you say, you have 10 seconds to fix this, otherwise you die. What better motivator? So, leave your comments. Please, if you are subscribed to my channel, and if you comment enough and you care, my thing is for you, I'm doing a lot of the work to help. The only thing I ask for is to you to share it. And it doesn't even have to be my video. So for the people that think I'm trying to do this to get views, if you have another video out there that you want to promote that's not mine, as long as it says the message that people need to hear, promote the hell out of it. Because this is about the message. And the idiots that think I'm doing this for views, you know what? Go to their channels and see how they contribute nothing. There are so many people in this world that love to bitch and moan and complain and do nothing. So that's it. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. Spread this. Watch it with other people. Get them to understand. Research the petrodollar. Research what's going on. Because if left unchecked, this is going to make millions and millions of people around the world very unhappy. It won't be today, probably won't be tomorrow. It may take a year or two, but this is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And one day the world will wake up in their different time zones, and they will find that the value they had in their currency was not the same that morning as it was the night before. And if you want to do nothing about it, good luck. If you want to do it based on fear, be careful. But if you just want to be prepared just in case, that's probably the smartest way to go. So thanks for listening. Have a great day. And don't forget to have your trolls spayed or neutered. This is Chris. This is Barnon 11970 bidding you a fair adieu.